Hello, this is SK Williams, and this is an unscheduled video because I can't speak freely on the platform any longer. So, if you will skip ahead the requisite quarter of an hour, then I shall get to the point of this video. But I will tell you this much. It is actually a reply to comments that I ought to be able to post freely, but can't. My post Spanish, and I must use code language and odd spelling in order to get them to remain. So, for now, just skip ahead in the silent section of the video for 15 minutes. But keep in mind, I will be using euphemism in order to get this across. If you got through the 15 minutes of silence, I thank you. The two of you doesn't like me very much right now. Al Gore has been sicked on me for disturbing his rhythm once too often, I suppose, and I don't really know what I did wrong because the two of you doesn't tell me. Nevertheless, the purpose of this video will take some time getting into because there's actually two parts of it. But I had a recent discussion, which was actually a repetition of a conversation that's been going on for years with me now, where two different atheists who are militant, and they don't like Christianity because of how evil it is, and they don't like religion because of how evil it is, were talking to me. And keep in mind, my comments are restricted on the two of you these days. Most of my posts vanish, and I have to leave short posts of only 2 or 3 sentences, and often use odd word choices as well as odd spelling just to get them to stay up, and even then it's iffy if they will. Approximately 2/3 of my comments are simply vanishing into the ether, and this has become a very real problem for me to communicate, which is why I'm making this video, because normally I would just leave this in the comments section. I might still do a video on this topic, but I wouldn't necessarily bring up the comments, or if I did, I would just point to it as a recurring theme that you see as part of an overall deal. But really, this is a topic about the mythology that modern atheists adhere to, which sounds weird since atheism isn't a religion. It's a lack of belief in a god, and they don't have mythology or ideology or beliefs or religion. But we all know that that's not really true. But at the same time, I am going to have to use euphemism, and I'm going to get to the topic in a roundabout way. I ask you for further indulgence, but this is how I have to do things, at least until January, because I don't know if it's true or not, but I hear that these sorts of restrictions are placed on you by the intelligence that is synthetic, and that it times out after 6 months. And I started noticing these problems in July, so more than likely around January these restrictions should go away, if that is accurate, and I don't know if it is. Again, Gaggle is very opaque with its policies these days. I usually find replying to people in comment sections in a video to be distasteful, precisely because it becomes one way. As the person running the channel, I automatically have a stronger voice than anyone in the comment section, and I automatically have a sense of power and authority, at least on my own channel, than the people I'm talking to. And since I'm referring to comments that happened on another channel, it might be harder to cross-check these things, especially since I won't be telling what video it is, just in case I run afoul. But do keep in mind, as much as I find it distasteful, this is the only way I can present this information. So, I apologize to the 2 people I'm actually talking to. I apologize that I have to do it this way. I'm not trying to single you out. I've had people do that to me before. I have a hate video made by an atheist about me, and it's a one-sided presentation that the fans of that channel can whoop and holler about and laugh at how stupid I am, listening to this person tell what my arguments and positions are, and then ridicule them with, of course, getting things wrong and doing the usual atheist rubbish, like accusing me of doing the gish gallop and saying that she lives rent-free in my head and all that. I'm not going to try and misrepresent what the posters I'm referring to said, and there are 2 of them. Yes, that's an odd way of saying it, but this is part of my disabilities when it comes to the 2 of you. And like I said, I would much rather it be a normal exchange, but this is how I have to do it. I don't even know if they're going to bother coming over here and watching the video, and since it is a video, anyone else can. But it's not like the positions I'm actually addressing in this particular video are their positions. They're just dogma that they learned about in their sacred scriptures. Which brings me to my first point. The video that we were talking about featured the divine prophet Sam Harris Most Holy talking to Jordan Peterson. And he was using his usual spiel about how religion and religious thinking is bad, yada yada yada, and how the Soviets were actually a form of religion, and so was the party in Jerryland that was led by Funny Mustache Man. And I will be calling him Charlie Chaplin, because Charlie Chaplin did a movie called The Dictator, where he basically was the same person. But know that I'm not really talking about Charlie Chaplin in this video. I think most people are smart enough to know what I'm talking about. And I'll be using a few other euphemisms that I'm trusting you to be smart enough to catch on to. But having said all of that, this is the usual rubbish, and one of them also brought up something about the new atheism that just is not true. I intend on doing videos on that as well. Again, it may not be my very next one after I get done with my Trinity video for the Shoot a Bit. I'm going to, on my channel on the Shoot a Bit, do a video on the Holy Trinity. And I am also going to do one on Charlie Chaplin and his party. And I'm also going to do one on the new atheism and why it wasn't really as organic as people say. And in those videos, I'm going to speak more freely because it will be on the Shoot a Bit and possibly later Ramble, because I'm thinking about getting a Ramble account. I won't be putting them up here because I've already been threatened with having my channel deleted, so it doesn't really matter. For now, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail for obvious reasons. But I am going to explain what I mean by the holy religion of atheism. The holy religion of atheism is a virulent form of secular humanism. I do not think all atheists are secular humanists. I do not think all secular humanists follow the holy religion of atheism. The term is actually a parody, since every time I try and explain my actual position that, while I'm not calling atheism a religion, atheists are nevertheless religious because there are atheist religions, plural. Because every time I say that, I'm accused of calling atheism a religion, and often called a liar who claimed I wasn't going to call atheism a religion, then turned around and called atheism a religion, as if I'm saying atheism in itself is a religion. I'm not. But at the same time, debates like this are too dominated by the idea that there are two sides. There's the side that are arguing for religion, and there's the side that argues for atheism, with atheism being understood as the opposite of religion. It is the lack of belief in a god, a lack of a religion. Sam Harris even said that. But atheism is not a lack of a religion. Atheism is not even a lack of belief in a god. Atheism is a belief that there is no god. Atheists actually routinely claim there is no God. So in spite of their statement that they make no claims about God not existing and have no burden of proof, they actually do. Of course, they also say you can't prove a negative. The only problem with saying that, well, there's two problems. The first is, even if we accept the premise that you can't prove a negative, that doesn't change the fact that you have claimed God doesn't exist and have the burden of proof. It just means that your task is impossible. You're still, however, demanding we believe without evidence that God does not exist, and thus still can't be expected to be taken seriously until you show evidence that God does not exist. Your proclamation that God does not exist is meaningless. With all that said, atheism is actually a belief that God does not exist, not a lack of belief in a God. And that's one of the main issues with the modern-day atheist movement. It defines atheism as a lack of belief in a god in order to abdicate any responsibility of actually having to prove anything, whilst ridiculing other people's beliefs and demanding they prove what they believe. And also while pretending their lack of belief makes them incapable of actually being biased, they're simply a neutral party asking for evidence when we all know they've actually taken a position in opposition to the one that they are demanding evidence for. It's not that they just passively lack belief in a God, nothing more. It's that they are taking the position that God does not exist and you're stupid and delusional and even a bad person for believing in God. They have decided to debunk every claim that you make about God. They are very obviously biased in that regard. They are not people who passively lack belief in a God because they haven't been shown sufficient evidence that God exists and are perfectly willing to change their mind with evidence. They are partisans who have a specific position and a specific agenda, and this agenda will prevent them from actually admitting you have any sort of valid points, or will at the very least cause them to patch their arguments should you find fault with them. And in addition to claiming God does not exist, they also claim religion is evil. One of the posters that I'm talking about even said religion is pathetic because it causes division, citing two examples, which I'll get into later on. But he didn't seem to want to admit that atheism can cause division. Because, of course, atheism is just a lack of belief in a God. How can a lack of belief cause division? But again, this only works if you fixate on the definition of atheism as a lack of belief in a God, and not on what people actually do in the real world, or what they really associate atheism with. Atheism, by the same people who define atheism as a lack of belief in a God, is associated with reason, with rationality, with logic, with critical thinking, with empathy, with compassion. And since atheism is the opposite of religion, religion doesn't have compassion. It is cruel, it is hateful, it has no empathy, it is irrational, it is illogical. Whereas atheism is connected with critical thinking, religion is associated with blindly believing with no evidence, which, by the way, is the definition of the word faith. We know faith is defined as belief without evidence, because the people who merely lack belief in a God, nothing more, keep saying so. They even say that the religious definition of faith is found in the Bible in Hebrews 11:1. Never mind the fact that they themselves insist that when they say religion, they're talking about all religion, not just Christianity. All religious faith is belief without evidence as proven by the New Testament of the Bible, because all religions use the New Testament of the Bible. This is the issue that I have with the modern atheist movement. It is very obvious that the people who I'm talking to have all read the same books, listened to the same video channels, read the same blogs, read the same websites, and that they're all making exactly the same arguments. And they have an excuse for this. They say, well, we're just looking at the facts and following them where they lead. We're just arriving at the same conclusion independently based on the facts. You religious people would too if you religious people didn't have cognitive biases. Your cognitive biases prevent you from even looking at the evidence. And when you are confronted with something that contradicts your beliefs, this creates cognitive dissonance in you, and forcing you to come up with ad hoc explanations that become even more complex, which of course is mental torture, proving how evil religion is. Whilst we atheists, free of the religious mind virus, just follow the evidence, and the reason we're all saying the same thing is because that's where the evidence leads. The problem with this is, though, that they always fixate on the same handful of claims. Given that religion has a very long history within humanity, why focus only on Christianity? Well, they have an excuse for that. Because it's the most popular religion where I live. Why focus on only the same examples? Christianity has had a 2,000-year history. Why is it always Crusades and Inquisition when these, according to atheists themselves, these are only small examples of the evil Christianity did? Since even the most evil things like the Crusades, where the Christians tried forcing conversion by murdering those who wouldn't convert, and the Inquisition, where they killed heretics like Jews and Muslims and atheists, and the Second Great Conflagration by Charlie Chaplin, a devout Christian in the name of Christianity, killing the elves. By the way, elves is another euphemism for a certain group of people that I can't really mention in connection with certain things. By the way, I'm actually with an elvish woman, so just to put that out there. It's obvious that while on the one hand they're saying they merely lack belief in a God, on the other hand they're making a lot of claims and have a lot of mythology backing them up. And it's equally obvious that they don't hate all religions equally. They fixate on Christianity. It is not because it's the most popular religion, and that their examples are all gleaned from the certain same people. They even praise these people. So even though they'll all say they became atheists independently based on their own research before they read these people, and they'll all say that they think for themselves, and they'll all say they're just coming to their own conclusions, they're really just quoting the same handful of sources. And the sources they're quoting are themselves quoting other sources. There was nothing new in the new atheism. Not even their hatred and contempt for religion was new. You could look at the same hatred and contempt for religion and religious people, or at least Christians, in the 19th century with people like Charles Bradlaugh and Joseph McCabe and George Jacob Holyoake and others like them. And the simple reality is that the atheist movement is a religion that hides behind the term atheism and demands we define atheism as a lack of belief in a God, and only define atheism as a lack of belief in a God, and never question it, so that they never get called out on anything. You can't demand they prove anything. They never have a burden of proof. You can't say they have an ideology because a lack of belief isn't an ideology. You can't criticize them. So they hide behind that. But the modern atheist movement is not just a bunch of people who lack belief in a God. It's people who claim God doesn't exist and embrace a specific secularist ideology. And it's irrelevant how the word atheism is defined. And that's important to note because the new atheist movement was actually a well-funded movement that was created specifically to help push a political and social agenda. It is connected with liberal progressive politics and was financed by someone whose name I also can't mention, but who sounded like Jack Ebstone. Jack Ebstone ran the Edge Foundation. He was its chief financier. He was its biggest donor. And while I don't believe Ebstone to be the actual founder of this group, he did bankroll it and make it what it became. And he had a very close relationship with one John Brockman. John Brockman is, of course, the literary agent for all four of the four horsemen of the New Atheism, who all published via the same publishing company. Which is brought up in this video because one of the two posters that I was speaking to actually had the audacity to claim that these four people had no connections whatsoever, when I pointed out that it was not a grassroots operation, because the modern-day atheist movement is actually well-funded and operates through various 501c3 tax-exempt organizations, many of which are also 501c1 tax-exempt organizations, and that they are very obviously coordinated, where you see a lot of atheist presenters who do collaborations with other atheist presenters, for example. And you will see them exchanging ideas and bouncing ideas off of each other, and that they have a developed mythological system. He countered this by pretending I was only talking about the four horsemen, and he countered this by saying that they only met one time that he knows of. And that was in Hitchens' house in that one famous photograph. And he claims to have posted a link, and to be fair, he may have. The tube of you tends to vanish posts with links that proves that they had careers before they started the new atheism. The problem with this is that it proves the fallacy of atheist logic, reason, and critical thinking. My statement was that the new atheism was a coordinated effort, that all four of them had the same literary agent, all of them had connections to the Edge Foundation, all of them were bankrolled by Jack Ebstone ultimately, and that there was an obvious astroturf nature to this, since they're all connected to the same atheist organizations. Countering that by saying that before they wrote their books, they had careers independent of that, doesn't really make what I said go away, especially when you consider the reality. It's not like when they wrote their books, those books came out of nowhere for them. The bloke claimed that they were simply for individual people who had an interest in the effect religion had on society. Obviously a bad negative effect, because religion is bad and evil. And they wrote independently, they worked independently, and the media did nothing but expose a deep popular interest in the topic of religion and how dangerous it was. This is ridiculous. Even if you didn't know about Jack Ebstone, the Edge Foundation, and John Brockman, just reading their books and ignoring who published them, it is obvious that these works are interconnected. All one has to do is read them and look at the footnotes. For example, the Divine Prophet Sam Harris Most Holy released The End of Faith in 2006. Later on, Richard Dawkins released The God Delusion. And The God Delusion quotes directly from The End of Faith and references Sam Harris's work. And while it's been a while since I've read it, I do know that God is Not Great, How Religion Poisons Everything by the plagiarist, the Divine Prophet Christopher Hitchens Most Holy, who can do no wrong, say no wrong, be no wrong, even though he plagiarized Chapman Cohen, also references Richard Dawkins and Sam Harris. And they also reference a few other people like Steven Pinker. Am I supposed to look at these people quoting each other, referencing each other's work, and leaving each other's books in their footnotes, and say, they're just working independently of each other with no connections? It's obvious they're connected, since they're at least reading each other's books and interacting with the ideas they produce. It is ridiculous to say that they're not connected. And when you realize they're all publishing via the same publication house, and when you realize they all have the same literary agent, and when you realize they were all part of the Edge Foundation, and when you realize they were all taking money from Jack Ebstone, it makes absolutely no sense to pretend that they were just four guys working independently of each other who happen to all have an interest in religion and how religion affects humanity and how its adverse negative effects are, and that there's no coordinated effort whatsoever. Add to that the fact that even before they wrote these books, they may have had careers before, which, by the way, isn't entirely true. The Divine Prophet Sam Harris Most Holy has only had one career in his entire life, and that is as an atheist activist or activist for left-wing causes. I know that he is billed as a neuroscientist because he got a neuroscience degree. But he got the neuroscience degree in a way that is rather, shall we say, uncomfortable to talk about. And he has never worked in a hospital or research lab or anything, or in a teaching capacity with neuroscience. It's more accurate to describe him as someone with a neuroscience degree who has never worked in the field of neuroscience than to pretend than to call him a neuroscientist, which carries with it the connotation that he's actually worked in a scientific capacity somewhere. And considering his doctoral thesis was actually co-written by 3 other people, and he didn't actually do any of the lab work, it's really uncomfortable to call him a neuroscientist. Especially since my own degree is in psychology as well as in religious studies. Having said that, the Divine Prophet Sam Harris Most Holy paid for his degree by opening Project Reason, which itself equates reason to atheism, since Project Reason was an atheist advocacy organization, which assumed if you promote atheism, you're promoting reason. Contrastly, if you are promoting reason, you must by definition be promoting atheism. Presenting atheism as the opposite of religion, meaning it is presenting reason as the opposite of religion. When Project Reason collapsed, all of the funds that were raised by the Divine Prophet Sam Harris Most Holy were given to the American Humanist Association. And incidentally, the Divine Prophet Sam Harris Most Holy is a member of the American Humanist Association. The late Christopher Hitchens was also a member of the American Humanist Association. Daniel Dennett is a member of the American Humanist Association. I don't know about Richard Dawkins, but Dawkins is a member of the National Secular Society in the UK, which was created first. The National Secular Society was founded before the American Humanist Association, but the American Humanist Association was largely the American version of the National Secular Society, and shared all the same literature. Most of the literature in the foundational years of this came from the Rationalist Press Association, and a lot of the books that were printed by the Rationalist Press Association made their way across the Atlantic, and were also the fuel that powered the American Humanist Association. Incidentally, the three American citizens of the Four Horsemen were also members of American Atheists. Dawkins, of course, is a member of several atheist organizations and even founded an atheist organization in the UK. But obviously, not being a part of American Atheists, and I don't know if he actually isn't, I just don't have any evidence that he is more because of his nationality, should he not be. All three of them also have ties to the Freedom from Religion Foundation, ties that go back to before their books were written in the New Atheism. So it's obvious that the Divine Prophet, Sam Harris Most Holy, the Divine Prophet, Christopher Hitchens Most Holy, the Divine Prophet, Richard Dawkins Most Holy, and the Divine Prophet, Daniel Dennett Most Holy, were not working in isolation from each other. They all belonged to the same organizations. The only possible exception is Dawkins, and Dawkins belonged to equivalent organizations in the UK that had firm ties to the American counterparts. For instance, the National Secular Society in the UK maintains firm relations with the American Humanist Association, and with the Freedom from Religion Foundation, and with Humanist International, and with various other groups. And all of this was true of these people well before they wrote their books. And they were all connected to the Edge Foundation before they wrote their books. So, pretending the Four Horsemen of the New Atheism were working in isolation as four disparate individuals with no connections to each other, simply writing books because they were interested in the effects religion had on society, and the media did nothing but expose a deep interest in it, it's just simply not true. There was a large media effort to promote these books. And keep in mind, the media is largely run by left-wing people who largely are more sympathetic to destroying Christianity and promoting an atheistic, secular, humanist future. So with AstroTurf, it was an artifice that was created by well-funded, politically connected institutions. And that is why they all say the same things. And, by the way, this is a point atheists always ignore. It's not just that they're making the same broad general points. They use the same terminology. And that terminology often sounds, to our modern ears, technical because they're getting it from the 19th century and they're using the older books and they're not really changing anything. Like when Samuel Putnam, in his 400 Years of Free Thought, described religion as creating tribalism. Well, Sam Harris said the same things, virtually word for word, because he was quoting from Samuel Putnam. The new atheism was always AstroTurf. And the reason that's important in a top video that is actually about Charlie Chaplin and his nationalists who like socialism party, henceforth I might just call it the party for short, in Jerryland, is because the source of information these posters gave about Charlie Chaplin, and about the party, and about Jerryland, they all came from these sources, and these sources got them from other sources too, but mostly, as far as the modern atheist community is concerned, they're largely deriving these claims from the Divine Prophet Sam Harris Most Holy, or from the Divine Prophet Christopher Hitchens Most Holy, neither of whom were historians. Neither of whom actually had any real validity in their arguments either. For example, One of the more ridiculous claims you will hear, and I've heard this one for years, is that the Catholic Church... The general claim is that the Catholic Church fully approved of and endorsed the party in Jerryland, the Jerryland Party. And they even signed a concordance with them, an agreement, because they loved them so much and they approved of what they believed in. And often it is said that Jerryland, the Jerryland Party was doing nothing more than writing church dogma into law, and Charlie Chaplin himself was a devout Catholic, and he got his hatred of the elves from the official teachings of the church, since the church officially taught anti-elvinism for centuries, and in fact, even after the Second Great Conflagration, maintained teaching as official dogma that the elves were evil killers of Jesus, and only changed their official teachings in 1964. This claim was actually made in the threads that I was talking about. It's not true, of course, but it's the claim that they make, that the official church teaching was that elves were evil killers of Jesus, and the church taught this consistently, even after the Second Great Conflagration, up until 1964. And it was only in 1964 that the Catholic Church changed its official teachings. The Catholic Church officially taught elves were evil until 1964, when they changed their teaching. Nonsense. All one has to do is look at the historical record honestly. There is a document written approximately in 1120 that actually defined the Catholic Church's historical understanding of elves. And it is called Sictus Judaicus. This document was first released by Pope Calixtus II, but it was reissued several times throughout several centuries. It was reissued, for example, in 1199 by Pope Innocent III, and it was reissued again later by Alexander III, Celestine III, beginning in order. Alexander III, Celestine III, Innocent III, Honorius III, Gregory IX, Innocent IV, Alexander IV, Urban IV, Gregory X, Nicholas III, Martin IV, Honorius IV, Nicholas IV, Clement VI, Urban V, Boniface IX, Martin V, and Nicholas V. And these are popes that range in time from about 1165 or so AD to 1447 AD. The myth that the church taught as official church doctrine, that the elves were evil killers of Jesus, and that this was officially taught consistently through the church up until 1964, when they officially changed their teachings, is simply not the reality. To repeat what Innocent III said when he reissued it, because he did make emendations to it when he reissued it. And I will be changing a few words here, obviously, to avoid Al Gore's wrath, but the elves ought to suffer no prejudice. We, out of the meekness of Christian piety, and in keeping in the footprints of our predecessors of happy memory, the Roman pontiffs Calixtus, Eugene, Alexander, Clement, admit their protection, and we grant them the buckler of our protection. For we make the law that no Christian compel them, unwilling or refusing, by violence to come to baptism. But if any one of them should spontaneously, and for the sake of the faith, fly to the Christians, once his choice has become evident, let him be made a Christian without any calumny. Indeed, he is not considered to possess the true faith of Christianity who is not recognized to have come to Christian baptism, not spontaneously, but unwillingly. Let me repeat that part. Indeed, he is not considered to possess the true faith of Christianity who is not recognized to have come to Christian baptism, not spontaneously, but unwillingly. The concept that Christians went about forcing people to convert and would roll into pagan or elvish villages and say, "Convert or die," is a big part of the mythology of the holy religion of atheism. But it is not reality. This document is only one piece of evidence for that, but it does show that the elves were not subjected, according to official church teaching, to any sort of forced conversion efforts or to any sort of prejudice or discrimination. Now, I'm not claiming that the elves never faced anti-elvish sentiment or were never subjected to any sort of harsh treatment, but it is obvious that the church did not approve of this sort of treatment, regardless of what the divine prophet Sam Harris Most Holy says, regardless of what the divine prophet Christopher Hitchens Most Holy said. To continue. 2. No Christian ought to presume to injure their persons, or with violence to take their property, or to change the good customs which they have had until now in whatever region they inhabit. Besides, in the celebration of their own festivities, no one ought to disturb them in any way, with clubs or stones, or ought any one to try to require of them or to extort from them services they do not owe, except for those they have been accustomed from times past to perform. We decree that no one ought to dare mutilate or diminish a Jewish cemetery, nor in order to get money to exhume bodies once they have been buried. If anyone, however, shall attempt the tenure of this decree once known, to go against it, let him be punished by the vengeance of excommunication, unless he correct his presumption by making equivalent satisfaction. Do those words sound like a church that officially taught anti-Elvinism? That they would excommunicate people who would attack the elves? Come now. Even though it's a big part of the mythology of the holy religion of atheism, that religion is inherently divisive and violent, and that the Christian religion in particular is worse, and that Christians hated the elves and thought of them as killers of Jesus, and that Charlie Chaplin was doing nothing more than carrying on the work that the church had done for centuries, and that the church taught official anti-Elvinism for centuries, only changing its official teachings in 1964. That is a lie. The church did not teach anti-Elvinism until 1964, and did not, therefore, in 1964, change their non-existent anti-Elvish teachings. And I don't care that the divine prophet Sam Harris Most Holy says otherwise. I don't care that the divine prophet Christopher Hitchens Most Holy said otherwise. They're liars. They have always been liars. They have an agenda, and their agenda is very obviously to promote their own religion at the expense of Christianity or Islam or other people's faith, whilst pretending to not be religious. They were actually cult leaders themselves, which is what makes it hilarious that the divine prophet Sam Harris Most Holy said that Stalin and Charlie Chaplin led cults of personality, and that their ideologies were just religions that excluded otherworldly concerns, and are not real secularism. This is nothing but a no true Scotsman fallacy. But you know what's really interesting about this? The divine prophet Sam Harris Most Holy leads a cult of personality. So did the divine prophet Christopher Hitchens Most Holy. But what's even more bizarre about this is that in contrast to Stalin and Charlie Chaplin, whom the divine prophet Sam Harris Most Holy identified as actually following a form of religion and not being true secularism, he claimed that this was not the secularism as promoted by David Hume and Bertrand Russell. That Bertrand Russell would have never approved of these religions by another name, of Marxist communism that was under the Soviet rule, or the party of Jerryland under Charlie Chaplin. That Bertrand Russell would be held up as an example of true secularism to contrast to Charlie Chaplin and to Stalin is gross historical ignorance or gross historical dishonesty. It is true that the divine prophet Bertrand Russell, most holy, did not like the overt use of violence within those regimes. But ultimately, he believed in exactly the same things as those regimes. He just believed that the specific policies that were set out to achieve those goals should be different and have a longer-term approach. For example, if you read the divine prophet Bertrand Russell, most holy's book, Marriage and Morality, he has an entire chapter dedicated to eugenics. And the chapter dedicated to eugenics is not dedicated to exposing it as a dangerous, violent pseudoscience, exposing that religious leaders approve of it, but real scientists oppose it, and that as an atheist, his morals won't allow him to support it. Rather, the divine prophet, Bertrand Russell, most holy, approved of eugenics. The divine prophet, Bertrand Russell, most holy, brought up the two forms of eugenics, both positive eugenics and negative eugenics. Positive eugenics would be to encourage breeding by the fit, by pairing them off with other fit people, and negative eugenics would be through sterilization of the unfit. And believe it or not, the divine prophet Bertrand Russell, most holy, opposed positive eugenics because he believed people would not be happy having the state pick who they marry or who they have sex with. But the divine prophet Bertrand Russell, most holy, did support sterilization of the unfit, including forced sterilization, claiming that if we sterilized the simple-minded, we would have an increase in intellects overall. He did have some reservations. I'm not going into them in detail because I might have my channel attacked again. But the divine prophet, Bertrand Russell, most holy, definitely thought the simple-minded, the feeble-minded, the unfit, those with congenital diseases, should be forced into sterilization, even claiming that this would, in the long run, make them happier. Even if you had to force them to do it against their will, in the long run they'd be happier not having children and being sterilized, and it would be a benefit to the human race. He had exactly the same basic mentality and basic philosophy that Charlie Chaplin did. The only differences are that he didn't want it to be on such a grand industrial scale, and he picked different targets. The divine prophet Bertrand Russell, most holy, did not target the elves that I know of, for example. But it is impossible to read Marriage and Morals from the divine prophet Bertrand Russell, most holy, and think he would have been particularly opposed in principle to the overall racialist science that was the underpinnings of Charlie Chaplin. To quote him, "Eugenics is the attempt to improve the biological character of a breed by deliberate methods adopted to that end. The ideas upon which it is based are Darwinian, and appropriately enough, the president of the Eugenics Society is the son of Charles Darwin. But the more immediate progenitor of eugenics ideas was Francis Galton, who strongly emphasized the hereditary factor in human achievement. In our day, especially in America, heredity has become a party question. American conservatives maintain that the finished character of a grown man is mainly due to congenital characteristics, whilst American radicals maintain, on the contrary, that it is that everything and heredity nothing. Maintain that education is everything and heredity is nothing. I cannot agree with either of those two extreme positions. nor with the primus, which they shared, and which gives rise to the opposition prejudice, namely that Italians, Southern Slavs, and the such like are inferior. So, obviously, he didn't hold to the exact racialist views, but at the same time, hear this. Eugenics is of two sorts, positive and negative. The former is concerned with the encouragement of good stocks, the latter with the discouragement of bad ones. The latter is at present more practicable. It has, indeed, made great strides in certain states in America, and the sterilization of the unfit is within the scope of immediate practical politics in England. The objections to such a measure, which one naturally feels, are, I believe, not justified. Feeble-minded women, as everyone knows, are apt to have enormous numbers of illegitimate children, all, as a rule, wholly worthless to the community. Those women would themselves be happier if they were sterilized, since it is not from any philoprogenitive impulse that they become pregnant. The same thing, of course, applies to the feeble-minded men. There are, it is true, grave dangers in the system, since the authorities may easily come to consider any unusual opinion or opposition to themselves a mark of feeble-mindedness. Those dangers, however, are probably worth incurring, since it is quite clear that the number of idiots, imbeciles, and feeble-minded could, by such measures, be enormously diminished. Measures of sterilization should, in my opinion, be very definitely confined to persons who are mentally defective. I cannot favor laws such as that of Idaho, which allow sterilization of mental defectives, epileptics, habitual criminals, moral degenerates, and sex perverts. The last two categories here are very vague, and will be determined differently in different communities. The law of Idaho would have justified the sterilization of Socrates, Plato, Julius Caesar, and St. Paul. Moreover, the habitual criminal may very possibly be the victim of some functional nervous disorder which could, at least theoretically, be cured by psychoanalysis, and which might well be not hereditary. Both in England and in America, the laws on such subjects are framed in ignorance of the work of psychoanalysts, and they therefore lump together entirely different types of disorder, merely on the grounds that they display somewhat similar symptoms. Now, I've read all of this just to give clarity to Bertrand Russell's actual positions, because I will, of course, be accused of misrepresenting them anyway, and I want to give myself the best defense. Bertrand Russell did not agree with all of the racial stances of Charlie Chaplin, but he did nevertheless believe that feeble-minded persons and persons with certain psychological disorders that would be congenital ought to be sterilized, and thought it would be beneficial for society and community. He did harbor certain fears that it would be turned against certain groups that don't deserve it, and he did indeed think that certain disorders are treatable by psychoanalysis, but it doesn't change the fact that he was in favor of forced sterilization of the feeble-minded. This is the man that the divine prophet Sam Harris Most Holy holds up and says was true secularism next to Charlie Chaplin and his religiously motivated Jerry Party ideal. And keep in mind, the divine prophet Sam Harris Most Holy also contrasting with Stalin. Do you have any idea what the actual political views of Bertrand Russell were? Because while it is true that he had misgivings about Marxian socialism, and it is true that he did not agree with everything that the Soviet Union did, he was very taken with Lenin and said very kind things about him, and largely agreed with his socialist aims. He just disagreed with certain aspects of Marxism and with certain aspects of the policies. Bertrand Russell was, in fact, a socialist. So he was a socialist, just like Charlie Chaplin, and just like Stalin, and just like Lenin, who embraced eugenics, just like Charlie Chaplin. just like Stalin, because Stalin actually did accept eugenics as well. So, we're stuck with the reality that Bertrand Russell had basically the same beliefs that Stalin and Charlie Chaplin had. And I know that sounds weird, because Charlie Chaplin is depicted as being far right, whereas Stalin is far left. And I know that the excuse will be that even though the party had the name socialist in it, they only did that to be popular, they weren't socialist. And I know all the reasonings, and I can't go into them. But if you actually look at even the evidence that Charlie Chaplin's Jerryland Party was not socialist actually proves he was, like closing down labor unions. Supposedly this proves he was a capitalist who hated labor, since labor would support labor unions, but the Soviet Union and Communist China also closed down the labor unions. I can't go into detail for obvious reasons, but I will later. The point being made is that there really wasn't much difference between Bertrand Russell's views and the views of Stalin and the views of Charlie Chaplin. Just in certain specific things they disagreed with, often considerably more minor than the theological debates that atheists make fun of Christians for. Which begs the question, what exactly was the Catholic Church's actual response to Charlie Chaplin and the Jerryland Party? Since this video is already long, I'll do a part 2 on that. But this will be my preamble. Until then, thank you, God bless, and goodbye.